Hi, I'm Simon Hartley.
And I'm Helen Gilmartin.
Welcome to Pep Talks. Helen, we're joined today by Todd. How do you know Todd? How did you come across him?
So, Simon, let me first introduce Dr. Todd Dewett. Todd is a global keynote speaker and a top LinkedIn Learning author. So, LinkedIn Learning have created an assorted bank of material that many of us have used over the last few weeks, but it included a video on the elevator pitch. And I think we all understand the importance of a strong pitch, especially in a sales organisation such as the one I belong to. Having watched Todd's high energy video, I decided to test my elevator pitch on Todd, and thankfully I didn't go to the basement, and Todd agreed to come on Pep Talks.
Hey, my pleasure. Great to be here.
So Todd, how do you get a really clear, concise message? Because I think a lot of people who are used to communicating verbally and face-to-face won't be able to do as much of that these days, but they still need to communicate a really clear, concise message.
I mean, it's a great question. So you need to have some idea of the parameters that will help you be successful with a simple task like this. And then you need practice. So maybe we talk about both of those as much as you like. There is no perfect way to do this. So what I like to tell people, I start with that. And then I say, here's what works for me. Here's what I've seen that works. And maybe you'll find your version of this that will work for you. The thing is, we all have tons to say about ourselves. That's usually not a problem. We're just odd when someone unexpectedly puts us on the spot and asks us to articulate something about ourselves. So it's kind of strange because we don't find great difficulty figuring out how to answer certain things about ourselves if we had time, we weren't nervous, etc. But then when someone puts you on the spot, so we do need those parameters. And there is no perfect model here, but I like to say 10 to 15 seconds. It might be, or 15 to 20. It might be 20, 25. It might be 5 to 10. Everyone's different. Every situation is different. But it's definitely not 30 to 60, and it's definitely not less than 5. So there's your sweet spot. Let's call it, 10 to 20, something of that nature. What do you talk about? If you're prepared, it's actually easy. But the reason we're having this conversation is because people don't think they need to prepare for it. So you prepare by thinking about where you've been, where you are, and where you're going. These are important parts. Some people leave out a part that kind of gives you an incomplete story or an incomplete comment. Where you've been is kind of how you got here. Well, the truth is I work as a mechanical engineer in aviation. Maybe that's where I've been. I don't know what the answer is for any one of us, but there's a simple, it took me about 3 seconds to share it with you, answer as to where we've been. And it really should be that quick. Then there's where we are. I'm currently a manager over 3 plants making aircraft engines. I don't know. I'm just making this up literally as we're talking right now. But that's a concise, again, 3 or 4 seconds of where I am now. And that's really interesting because now you got to cap this story with the most important part. Where are you going? Because now you've told someone where you've been, kind of where you are, but most importantly, why does that matter? Where are you going? How might they help? All of that comes down to the last little 5-second chunk, which says, I'm really looking to move into pharmaceuticals. And I'll tell you why, A and B, and you give your quick answer. Or, the truth is, I've fallen in love with being in aviation. The goal for me is to move into executive roles when I have the opportunity in the next few years. That might be your back end. There's no right answer. The only wrong answer is to fail to touch on those 3 obvious telling parts of your story. And then I kind of started this quick rant with 2 parts. What are those parameters that make you coherent in an answer? And then this is so huge, and it just sounds weird to some people. Practice. I mean, as a leadership expert, I have to tell you, communication is everything, and communication gets better when you force yourself to practice little bits of it that make sense to practice. So an elevator pitch, which, come on, folks, is under 30 seconds any way you slice it, isn't hard to practice. So I would say something obvious, but hopefully really useful for your listeners. Think about a good colleague, just like you guys are colleagues. Think about friends as well, mentors, coaches, people with whom you can sit or at a minimum do what we're doing and speak online, and give it to them and then let them react, because feedback, as painful as it is sometimes, is terribly, simply useful. And what you think you wrote or what you think you're saying isn't necessarily what they heard. That's why we have coaches in the first place. So number one, know those parameters, where you've been, where you are, where you're going. And then number two, find ways to practice it so you can get better at hearing what they're hearing. That would make you very prepared.
Yeah.
So start off strong, follow with your backstory, and then join the dots. But how do you do that online? That's kind of what I heard when I listened to you speak, but I was thinking, how do we do that online at a time when we aren't in airports or at meetings or transient?
It's a great question. I think there's pros and cons to our online existence right now. The con, of course, is that we lack the visceral thing. Like, I look at your faces. You're both smiley. I see kindness. I know you're intelligent people. I get a good vibe from you. That's true. But it's not as visceral and moving and producing of emotions the way a physical connection is when you're sitting co-located with someone. So that's the downside. You have to admit it. There is an upside. First of all, know you're online, and the way you get successful online, hope you guys can see me, by the way. I'm not sure how dark I've got my room today. When you're talking to people online, remember to amp up your nonverbal communication and your volume just a little bit, because you need to amplify who you are and what your message is, so that little camera, in fact, some energy comes through with your words, not just your words and their meaning. I would say that's the first upside to remember. But the real upside is that you can do more online than you can in person. In person, you can't say, hey, here's a link. Would you like to click it? You can't do that. But when you're digitally trying to connect with someone, you can say what I was talking about a minute ago, and then you can have 1 or 2, not 20, not 30 links to your LinkedIn profile, to your website, to an online resume, if that's your thing, whatever it might be. So the ability to pique interest and then pull them in for those who want more is actually far greater online. So there's a silver lining that maybe we didn't see coming.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that I picked up, I don't know how many people would view their elevator pitch as a story. And actually that's really key from my point of view. I you know, that's really lit a bulb in my head. That story is easy to tell whatever medium you're in, isn't it? As long as you understand how to construct the story and you know the essential parts that you need to build into it.
You know, it's interesting you would say that, because that does bring out one of the most difficult parts of this topic, which is, okay, what if you're trying to write a really new chapter in your story? So for example, yeah, I've been in aviation as a mechanical engineer for 20 years. Great. But what if I'm trying to switch over to a related area of engineer in a targeted industry that's different? The whole idea of career change is probably one of the biggest curveballs people face when thinking about an elevator pitch. So what I advise people to do, and it's not easy, but when you think about it and then go through the feedback process that we were just discussing, you'll get better and better at it, is to think when you're making a change or aspiring to a change, think less about a literal interpretation for your short comment about the past into a more general comment about the past. So instead of pigeonhole yourself as a mechanical engineer, say, you know, I've been involved in engineering in several different ways, including a little bit of engineering administration. And now I'm looking to, and now you've given a general comment that doesn't overly pigeonhole you before you say kind of where you are and where you're going. So the story, it matters. It must have integrity. It must be real. But how much you say I am down here in this depth of expertise versus I am a little bit more of a generally skilled person over here depends on whether or not you're staying in a similar area or trying to make a big change.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the other thing that I find really interesting, when people communicate via video, usually, in my view, you need to just think about what you're doing and structure it a little bit more than you do normally, because you've got a little window to capture people. It's the same with spoken communication often, but in a video, people can literally tune out. If you were standing in front of somebody, they might give you the time of day and just be polite. But just that process of structuring it, like you say, and practicing it and making sure it's really concise, it's what I thought of as the Twitter discipline ages ago. You've only got so many characters, use them properly. And on video, I think it's the same. You've only got a little bit of time, use it really wisely.
I couldn't agree more. And nonetheless, the interactivity, whether it's live or through comments back and forth, is amazing online and will help you understand what your story is saying, whether you thought it was saying that or not. And that's great because none of these start out perfect the first time. But if you engage the way you're supposed to network as a professional, you're going to get that feedback. And over a relatively short period of time, your story will be informative and will be saying what you wanted it to say.
Yeah.
Is it important to make your story relevant to whoever you're speaking to, you know, in finding out something about them first, or?
Well, I wouldn't say changing your pitch, which is a very short little instrument we're talking about. I would say, I would rephrase what you said and say, okay, so when do you pull the trigger and use it? And that's a great, great idea. You don't start by going, hi, I'm Todd, nice to meet you, and then pitching. You allow a casual connection to emerge, and it is always wise to first be inquisitive, and it has to be sincere. We know this, but I'm going to say it anyway. It has to be genuine. Be inquisitive and want to know about others. Because when you do that effectively, whether they have a great pitch by my standards or not, they will be reciprocating with you and find you interesting, because humans like a connection and they like to be around people who are showing interest. So you can increase the odds they listen to you, care about that pitch, process that pitch, and potentially follow up at some point by first doing it to them, asking about who they are, how they're doing, what they're up to, and letting them make their first statement. Absolutely.
Yeah, cool. The other thing that I find really interesting in this is that to create consistent messages, I was listening to some of your content online earlier about authenticity and making sure we've got a really consistent, coherent link and you know, a real sort of a genuine link between who we are and what we believe in and the values that we hold and what we say and do on a regular basis means that we're going to communicate this stuff more consistently every time we do.
It is, you know, authenticity. I could go on for much longer than this little chat with you guys today about why it's interesting, what it is, etc. It plays a role in this conversation that we've niched out today about pitches, because people very often err towards being conservative and impersonal when thinking about an elevator pitch. And what I would love to encourage people to do, because of the power of authenticity, the idea of being a little more real, honest, human, it absolutely informs a pitch. So for example, instead of saying, you know, I've been in the aviation business, I'm thinking now actually about pharmaceuticals. Well, here's why. The reason is because there's a focus on innovation in this industry that intrigues me, whereas there's a lot of collateral assets in status quo still, which I understand that's going to take this industry for a long time. So that change in cultural focus that I see is actually something very appealing to me. I mean, I went a little long there, but that could be an example of a personal, honest, candid comment that kind of speaks to authenticity, that makes a pitch sound more believable instead of something highly scripted that you just wrote. Does that make sense?
Oh, completely. And I think, you know, when people are genuinely communicating with passion, you see it, you hear it, you feel it. You're right. It's very, very different than just having the words written down. Very
different.
Yeah.
And let me remind your listeners, by the way, before I forget, people who are great communicators, even great communicators, can communicate with no passion and no nonverbals and shut down emotionally when they're not comfortable. That's why a pitch is great when it's been practiced, so that you achieve comfort and allow that vibrant you to come out.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that I've come to realize over the years that I want to kind of bounce off of you, when things are clear in your own mind, you tend to communicate them clearly. If it's all a little bit scrambled up there, it's likely to come out a little bit scrambled too, isn't it?
It is, and this is an interesting comment, to be honest, because even though it isn't necessarily fair at all, if you sound in a focused, tiny little opportunity to connect that we're calling a pitch, if you sound confused, uncertain, that is a problem. I'm not saying it's fair. I'm saying it's true. You do not want a first impression, which you can never redo. A first impression is all you get for a first impression. You want that to sound clear and reasonably confident, because if you want to talk about the question marks you're facing, which we all have That's great, and that speaks to authenticity, but that's round 2 of a conversation that developed after starting with a focused pitch that was more clear, compelling, and confident.
I guess the objective is to get noticed or get lost, isn't it? So actually, one of the things I forgot to mention in my introduction to you is that you're a TEDx speaker. And that's, I always think that is like an elevator pitch at a different level. You have this period of time and you have to, you have to tell something about yourself and also get the message across. How difficult is that, Todd?
Well, I speak for a living, so I found it exhilarating more than difficult. But I've also watched a lot of people who aren't professional speakers prepared to give TED or TEDx talks. And for most people, it's really difficult because you have very strict time constraints. In fact, I'm kind of feeling a little melancholy because I was asked to do my second one recently and it was canceled because of the virus that we're all dealing with. So I'm hopeful that it happens again. But in my case, I took a story, which usually takes 10 to 12 minutes when I'm on stage speaking, and they asked me to maximize the time at 9 minutes. I think that's what it was, something like that. Maybe it was 8. The point is it was less than normal, and I had to go do the thoughtful preparation and then rehearse to make sure it's repeatable so I can stand there and do it in that amount of time. But, that speaks, Helen, the same way to practice that I said just a minute ago helps your pitch. The challenge in communication usually isn't figuring out what to say. With a little thoughtfulness and feedback, you can figure out what to say and how to structure it. The real key is delivering that effectively. That comes down to practice, comfort, and confidence.
Yeah. And having worked in sport for a lot of years, I'm always surprised that business people don't engage in more practice. I mean, for an athlete, it's a given. If you want to get better, you have to practice. And yet the whole concept seems to be a bit alien. I've also come to realize that practice and confidence absolutely go hand in hand. Yeah, because you can't conjure confidence out of nowhere.
Some people can, and they're rare and beautiful. Most of us have to see evidence of good performance, and that incrementally builds our confidence, right? I have to tell you, just as an educator, one way to look at what I do, I'm an educator. I was a professor for a long time before I gave it up to speak and write full time. And the truth is, we know across many disciplines, from various areas of psychology to sociology to anthropology to all kinds of studies, that communication is such a core life skill that determines so much about your success. It's hilarious. And yet, it plays such a tiny role in the educational process as a topic we focus on and try to teach people to do. And then you graduate this education process, you go to work, and you see exactly what you just said, which is people whose fortunes are dependent on quality communication who don't seem to understand they probably need to practice the key moments a little bit more. Now, is that sad or difficult or odd? Sure. But for you and I as professionals, that's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for anyone who wants to step up and grow, because if someone else isn't practicing and you are, that's an opportunity for you. Or for me as an educator, I get to talk about it a lot. Why? Because once we start talking, everyone knows, you're right. We probably should be focused on this more, and I'm intrigued and I'm listening. So it gives me part of my job to do.
The other little reflection I wanted to bounce off of you, getting a really good pitch, it kind of hinges around simplification. And as a coach, I work with people to help them simplify and clarify. And my observation is that it's really difficult for a lot of people. Overcomplicating is very, very easy. Deliberately simplifying and clarifying is difficult, and it takes effort and it takes thought. And I think often that's the barrier for people. Do you see something similar? Is that
absolutely
your
right?
Experience?
You're absolutely positively correct. The more intelligent people are, the more successful they are, the more experienced they are, the more they want to say this instead of saying this. One of the best mottos I've ever seen is a paper in the United States, USA Today, and their motto is a wealth of information, an economy of words, which I think is brilliant. And the pitch gives us a good chance to exercise. I want you to think of it kind of as a resume. The pitch has to be ironclad, clear, small, short, concise, with the structure that we talked about. And then back to the practice part of this equation, you can have someone just like yourself, a great coach, to say, all right, it's great to meet you. So what is it that you do? And then your student gives the pitch. And then, like an interviewer using a resume in an interview, you can start to ask more, pick apart, find out where they've got something clear to say, find out where they're still soft. All that is important, and it is step 2. Step 1 is doing what you said, and that's helping these intelligent people learn to start by saying less, which means you got to choose your words wisely.
Absolutely. Oh, one of my favorite phrases is words are powerful, use them wisely. And I think it absolutely speaks to that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Knowing the challenges that people have got at the moment in communicating and connecting with each other in a world that's largely going to be dictated online, are there any sort of real nuggets of gold that you think people could grab onto and take and use at the moment?
Sure. I mean, I can come up with 50. Let me give you one that I think is vital and answers your question that's relevant, very relevant. In the word I'm thinking of is vulnerability. So there's been a movement in management leadership circles in the last 10 years. Several people have gained some fame talking about this. I'm one of thousands who've tried to take this topic and elevate it for years. And the idea is real simple. If authenticity and connection and comfort in a relationship drive great performance, then how do you get there? And being human, which really means being vulnerable, occasionally, you don't lead with it, it's not your pitch, but occasionally letting out that insecurity, that question mark, that doubt, that moment you didn't perform like you thought you were going to perform, all those universally human things that we all go through. That vulnerability makes people feel more comfortable with you because guess what? They have the same human problems that you have. So what I like to tell people is that as we're transitioning either full-time for some people as a percentage of their time, the way I am online, don't do what a lot of people do when they go online and shut down the emotions, shut down the authenticity, shut down the person, the human, and just get measured and consistent and professional because this is a strange thing and look at us talking online. No, do it as much as you can and remember to amp up the emotion and the nonverbals. And even though you don't lead a pitch with it, once a conversation develops with a colleague or a new customer, whoever it is, allowing, and this is an important word, small amounts of that honest vulnerability to enter a conversation. Small is important. If it was common all the time, they would question you. That's why people say it's bad. It's not bad. When it's used in small amounts, it is humanizing and builds bonds like few other things. And you can do that online just like we're speaking right now. You just have to remember that it's part of the conversation.
Absolutely.
I think we spoke about this quite a bit this week, actually, just about you have to bring 20% more energy when you're doing this online than you would if you're in person, because you're feeding off people's energy. When you're doing this, you really aren't when you're on a video conference. And the other thing we kind of spoke about, just to your point, is around the emotion and how as leaders in a business now, we have to manage the emotion, because fear is contagious, as we know, that's spreading quicker. So we have to manage the emotion. And I think that's what you're saying as leaders, top down doesn't work. You have to be there. We're all vulnerable together.
Yeah.
The role is or what you're
how do you convey that, Helen, online? So we're sitting here right now, we're just faces on a screen, right? Yes. But you're not wrong, and it's what I just said. You've got to find a way to make that emotion come through. So how do you do it? Well, you can increase the candor a little bit. You can increase the honesty a little bit. You can take the volume up just a little bit. You can see, I'll just pick on me because I'm well known to do this as a professional speaker in different platforms. I can't seem to sit still. My face is always moving. I use my hands. I know, having done a million online talks of different types, how I'm perceived by others. I've gotten, for better or worse, I've gotten that feedback many times. And what they say, so now I'm just telling you what I've learned, what they say is that when people are feeling emotions and showing it the way we know that they can, the message on the other side is flat out received better. I mean, I don't know how else to say that for your listeners. If you want people to hear your message, it's especially online. It's not just about a coherent, logical message. It's also about an engaged, emotional message.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Contagion. I think that's what it's called. Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. Todd, thank you very, very much indeed for joining us. Helen, thank you very much. Thank you also for watching, and we'll see you again on another episode of Pep Talks.
Thank you.